BTW, FYI. Visit Nexplanon.com RN to learn about Nexplanon. It's an adjustable implant, 68 milligrams radio pain. Or ask your HCP IRL. Okay, TTYL.
Atheists, agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Trey Warndorf, a political scientist at Oklahoma Christian University, and I am joined, again, by Justin Holmes, a professor of political science at Northern Iowa. Justin, how be it?
It's good to be here. It's been a week, but I look forward to doing this. Like, this is so much more interesting than so many of the things I've had to do this week. So,
just for listeners' edification, we both kind of had a week, and I was thinking about it, we kind of match for those of you who are watching, and
really need to coordinate these things better.
I mean, who would have thought? This is the time of the year where students come in, the problems are happening, and some of them are like real and they're tough, and they just take, I think it's really hard for people who don't work in education to recognize how much emotional energy it can sometimes take. You got students with some food insecurity or other things going on, get all kind of things happening. And
we're doing registration right now, and so I've got like advising, which
we just got done with that.
Is the most stressful thing that I do, because like if I screw up there, like you can cost people money, and that's just no good. So
absolutely, and these are your students. You don't want to do that, and
exactly.
It's hard. So
I'm excited to be here talking to you, because I always enjoy this, and it's so much better than, this is going to sound like damning praise, but it's so much better than advising and and things like that.
Well, and here's the thing for listeners: you guys are so much more excited to actually participate in the stuff that we do. That's the other fun thing. It's like you guys want to be here. Not every student wants to be here. They're coming in. So let's get into this week. But I will remind you, though, because we're back at you and me this week, we will be continuing our we're going to be continuing our ideologies look for our supporters exclusive show. So I'm really excited about that too. We've had a lot of really positive feedback. But let's get into the news for this week, because goodness gracious, it's going to take a minute when it's all said and done. So
it's been a long year this week.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I think every Politics Guys show has started with the shutdown, but I'm just going to change, because we've got to change. So we're going to start with Tuesday's elections. We'll get to the shutdown, I promise. But we're going to start with Tuesday's elections just to shake things up. And so this past week on Tuesday, we really had, whether you're on the left or the right, it's difficult to see this as anything other than a pretty resounding victory for Democratic Party. Now, of course, what does that mean in broader terms is an interesting question. Probably not as much as I think some think, but we'll get to that in a minute. But it is the first major referendum post the Donald Trump election. And the results themselves, at least in my view, do show that we're going to see that the idea of the economy remains a primary, and it always does. It remains the primary issue for voters. But what might be shifting here a little bit is which party is going to be getting more and less of the blame for the economy. Now, that might be a real shift. I'm curious about your take in a second. But we did see wins in New York City, mayorally, the governorships, of course, in both Virginia and New Jersey, and then the critical ballot measure in California is, where the major goes. A lot in the media are calling this a bloody nose to President Trump and to Republicans. When we take a look at AP voter polls, 17,000 voters in those key states were looking pretty abysmal when it took to the job approval of President Trump. And so it does appear in exit polling, from the early exit polling that I've looked at, that in New Jersey and Virginia, 4 in 10 voters were casting ballots primarily to oppose President Trump. So those are some interesting data points that we can get to. Now, again, looking to the exit polling, it is clear that economy was number one. It wasn't even close. Donald Trump, President Trump himself, he had the take that basically it was because he wasn't on the ballot. In a social media post this week, he said, quote, in all caps, Trump wasn't on the ballot and shutdown were the two reasons that Republicans lost the elections. And we'll get to that shutdown in a minute. But Ken, I think I want to talk about a few of these races in particular. I really want to talk about New York City. I want to talk about Mamdani. Obviously, the first Democratic Socialist to win that mayoral seat. He's also the first Muslim mayor, the first South Asian mayor, the first African-born mayor. There's a lot of firsts. He's the youngest in 100 years, right? But it is strange to me, I will say. Mamdani, I think he's giving hope to a lot of Democrats, but from my point of view, I see him as being kind of the wrong candidate to hang Democrats. I think it's the wrong candidate for Democrats to try to coalesce around. And again, I'm not a Democrat, but if you were going to pay me money, that's what I would suggest. And here's the line I was curious about on this front from you as well, Justin. He said, he had all these kind of shots at Trump, but put all that kind of stuff aside. And his big issue was, he said, quote, "We will prove that there is no problem too large for government to solve and no concern too small for it to care about," end quote. And I don't think that's really the messaging that is gonna, it makes me uncomfy. And I'm even open to kind of modern liberalism. And this is the kind of thing that I see as a problem. But of course, he did win 50%. Last I checked. I mean, again, these will change a little bit. A little over 50% of the vote.
Yeah.
And then Cuomo only gets up with 42. But the other thing we got to be careful about here, I mean, Cuomo, he's a guy with so much baggage that he almost makes Trump look like he doesn't have baggage. And, so what do you kind of do with those things? So what are your takeaways? I mean, especially since you obviously fall on a different spectrum than I do.
Yeah. And honestly, this is the kind of stuff I live for, in terms of professional interests. So I think I would preface this to maybe go back a little bit significance wise, just to start and then kind of get into some of the other things. One of I teach campaigns and elections class every other fall, and basically the opening day discussion, and then this ends up being more or less one of the final questions is, to what extent are elections sort of things that follow patterns and explicable, and to what extent are they sort of idiosyncratic? And, because I think oftentimes the press narrative around elections is idiosyncrasy, and the political science narrative is, campaigns don't matter and candidates don't matter and the economy matters. And that's that, and
well, why don't we give just 2 seconds on that? Because you say that, but I'm not sure everybody's immediately going to follow the literature the way that we do. Right. And so one of the things that we talk about as political scientists, there's a lot of evidence. In the wake of World War II, there's all of this desire basically for communication effects to explain the behavior of World War II. And we call it like the hypodermic needle model. Yep. You get a little bit of media, you get a little propaganda in there, and you're going to get
shoot it right into the brainstem. And
exactly.
And that doesn't work.
And that doesn't work. And now that doesn't mean that media doesn't have effects. As a matter of fact, that's one of my areas but the kinds of effects that they have are not, generally speaking, the one that most people are thinking about, which is, okay, instantaneously here, if I get media, that makes me more likely to vote Democrat or more likely to vote Republican. Instead, it's going to prime, agenda set, frame, those
And the other part of that
effects.
is the third person effect, where, I'm the one that's smart enough to see through this and all those other people are sheep.
Which, by the way, also does not work. It applies to everybody.
It works for me for like food ads, but maybe not politics. But yeah, so I guess so to kind of get to that point, I guess, these off-year elections, and we have people are hungry for evidence, about what's coming, and in terms of future elections, and I think that's a pretty standard public thing. Yeah, so we've had some special elections, and those are always weird a little bit. These are not midterms; these are off-year but regularly scheduled things. And I mean, you do get. I feel bad for people actually, I had a municipal election myself, but to have a governor election that's not in a midterm or a presidential year just seems, odd. So, in terms of what we can take from it, I mean, I think it is absolutely hard to read this as anything other than kind of indicative that things are going on the Democratic side, and that, Trump is going to have a bit of a time of it, in the midterms, which also is really nothing surprising. If you look at kind of the general pattern for midterms, and I don't know that anybody's really studied, kind of these weird weird odd year elections for patterns like that. But the standard for midterms is basically that, the president's party loses seats in Congress, almost always. And the three exceptions are like 1934 in the New Deal, 1998, which is kind of a impeachment backlash, and 2002, which is the first post 9/11 election. And so those are all explicable. But beyond that, I mean, it's not a question of how many seats do you lose, it's how bad is it going to be. Right. And those Republican majorities, I mean, the Democrats in the Senate are not facing, a super congenial map. On the other hand, you get into these scenarios. I mean, if you look at, say, like 2006, 2008, those were bloodbaths for elections where you're getting, you're getting Democrats representing North Dakota and things like that, and so I think that's kind of what people are looking at. What's the likelihood that Democrats take back one chamber or another in the future? And so, I mean, that's, I think, a lot of the interest here. And I think we have to be a little careful with these, I not to, throw a wet blanket on things by any means, but, these are maybe more idiosyncratic elections than a lot. Not as bad as those weird special elections, like we're trying to drive less.
But explain why, right? Because what I want to suggest is you're absolutely right, but the reason is turnout, right?
Exactly. And that's the whole, and that's the story that my pet peeve is that so much of the public discussion and the press discussion of election is flipping independents, and so much of the reality of elections, you have to do both. And this is kind of my my point of electoral evangelism, in my classes, so that, look, there's sort of three audiences that we're thinking about, broadly speaking, when it comes to elections. There's people that are likely to support you, there's people that are likely to oppose you, and there's people that are persuadable. And the press almost always focuses on the persuadables, and we send somebody to discover that, oh my God, there's rural Ohio. Some guy from the New York Times parachutes into Ohio.
Joe the plumber.
Yeah, who wasn't a plumber. But yeah, goes and wasn't named Joe for all that. But you go on, you go to, a small town cafe and talk to the locals and blah, blah, blah. And, the reality is, yeah, that's part of the story. But the other two parts are, pissing off your opponent's supporters and firing up your own. And it takes all three of those to win. And I would add, and I think I've said this on the podcast before, maybe not with you, but probably with Jay, actually, that, it is a hard task, because oftentimes you are, by taking positions and by running certain campaigns, you are trading off kind of some of your potential mobilization versus persuading independents. And you can't walk on both. You can't bail on, you need to do both of those. But the kinds of things, for Democrats, like moving left is going to turn out, it's going to fire up people who might have stayed home. Moving left is also going to make, some suburban soccer mom worried about what's going to happen, and
right.
So,
and in this particular election, what's important to then remember is that the base of people who are voting are going to be more likely to be those tails of the party. So in an election like this, you don't really have to worry about that median voter the way that you're talking about, because it's a weird election, and that's what makes them idiosyncratic.
In some cases, yes. In some cases, no, I think maybe. So New York, that, and I want to talk about Mamdani because I think he's really interesting in a minute. But, I think that's a completely idiosyncratic. I mean, there's not a lot, it's a weird electorate compared to the U.S. I think it is. You mentioned Cuomo, and yeah, I mean, Cuomo's a jerk. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, not only does he have all that baggage, but he ran a bad campaign. Excuse me.
I'm not going to say that you've cursed twice today, but you're in a mood. I love it.
I didn't even realize. I didn't even catch the other one. It's, I have to be careful. These are not my classes.
We're going to start holding up a sign every time. Every time. There's number 3.
Quarter in the Michael Baranowski swear jar, for buy him a watch or something. But yeah, I mean, it was a bad campaign. Like, I have no idea what he stood for, except that he wasn't Mamdani. Like, I have no, so, but anyway, so anyhow, you're absolutely right. I mean, a lot of voters are kind of not super attached. And, they're the people that show up in presidential years. We see a turnout drop in regular midterms, we see a bigger turnout drop in these weird off-year elections. I actually, one thing that I have not seen, what was the mayoral turnout in New York, for all that? Do we?
For the total, I've actually got all of our numbers up right here. We're going to have, let's see, we're going to be 2 million voters.
And what's that work out?
I'm rounding.
Do we know that as a percentage of eligible? Do we have any sense of?
I did not pop that up. My apologies.
No, and that's okay.
I have the pure totals for each I have the approximate totals for each person. The percentage for each of their goes.
Where is going? I mean, that's actually really good for me. Just guessing here. I mean, the population of New York is 5-6 million something, and not all those people are eligible. So that's actually pretty good. You see a lot of mayoral elections that are 15% turnout, 20% turnout. So that's going to be a particularly weird.
Again, we'd have to look at that because, of course, the size of New York City, I'd have to look at the demographic. It's huge, so that could be smaller than I'm doing the math in my head too.
Yeah, but you're going to have, when we do turnout, you need to take out everybody under 18. You need to take out the non-citizens, et cetera,
right,
for the denominators. So, my inclination is that 2 is actually pretty good. 2 million would be pretty good, but. Across all of these, that is, kind of the issue is that these are not super high turnout elections. They're not super indicative. And the other thing is, where it is maybe a good measure, I think where Democrats can find some hope in this is that these are like special elections. It was a national story. There was an Iowa Senate special election that, it was like a 25-point swing to the Democrats, back earlier this year. And that was like national news. I'm not sure that that's indicative of much beyond energy, but energy certainly matters. And again, if we're thinking kind of tight races, as far as what to take, I think part of this is, and this is maybe harder for a presidential race because you're running nationally. That's a tall order. But I do think that where I might disagree with you a little bit, Mamdani is clearly far to the left, and he would admit that himself, sure. And I would have voted for him too, I'm not, far left. I got no problem with that. But I'll
be honest. I don't want a guy who wants to create grocery stores and who thinks that every problem is a governmental problem. But yeah, we're gonna disagree. We'll talk about that.
17 states have state liquor stores. I think a few grocery stores is fine. But anyhow, but I think part of it is finding people that speak to where they're running, and I think that's an important thing for. So if you look at like Spanberger in Virginia, she runs a more moderate campaign, and I think
absolutely.
And so I think I don't know that anybody in the Democratic Party, I think the issue there that they're having is I think the concern is that, this is going to be made Republicans are going to try to make him the face of the Democratic Party. And
yeah, for sure.
But I don't think anybody, he got pretty tepid national endorsements, or no national endorsements, so the party was not super keen on him, the National Party. But, if you look to New York, him or AOC, they get people fired. They know their communities, but so does Spanberger. And I think you hit on something really important, which is that, a lot of this is affordability, which honestly is for all of the fire and fury where I kind of fall with the standard political science answer. Again, I was on with somebody on here, right after the election in 2024.
Oh, that would have been Jay for sure.
Probably Jay, yeah, and it was very much Democrats and trans athletes and blah blah blah. I said, well, you had a bunch of people mad about the economy and the incumbent party lost. Yeah, there's not much else to talk about, and nobody wants to hear that, but the context matters so much. But you have to be able to speak to the context, and I will say that kind of across the board, what you're seeing is people speaking to that sort of economic context, because inflation's not bad right now in terms of going up, but kind of the pain in the ass of inflation is that prices aren't going to go back down.
I'm just teasing you. That's the third one now.
Neck. Man, I don't know what's going on with me today. I'm just working towards you get the Samuel L. Jackson version of the podcast before this is over. So anyway,
you're quoting some Isaiahs with a little MFs in there, right?
Ezekiel 25:17.
Exactly.
So I have to remember that this is not my class of 18-year-olds where I thought
I also want to let you know, I did pop up the data for us here since we were looking at that too. So 2 million votes makes it the largest, and that looks to be what it's going to be, just under a scooch at 2 million. I was correct about that when I was doing my math here. That will make it the biggest mayoral race since 1969. When you got to 2.46 million between Lindsay and losing the primaries.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that's pretty big. The next closest is going to be 1989 with just under 2 million at 1.9 million. So that doesn't quite give us all of the, as we would as political scientists say, hey, what's the turnout? But it does at least give us a little bit of a through time trend.
And I think it's indicative of energy, which I think is what you can get from this. And certainly energy is on the Democrat side. The other thing, if you look, I mean, all the statewide stuff, there were 2 statewide offices in Georgia that they picked up. There were some judicial races in Pennsylvania, et cetera. I think in some ways those are smaller, less reported stories. But if I'm looking for sort of something indicative, Pennsylvania and Virginia are pretty swingy. Virginia, maybe not so much anymore. Pennsylvania is, that's the new Ohio in a lot of ways. I mean, the path to the White House leads through Pennsylvania. And so, these are all, Republicans have been quick to kind of downplay, the talking point that I saw pop up across social media almost immediately was, Democrats won in Democrat places, but they didn't. Like Virginia is.
Maybe we should move to Virginia, right? I mean, I think it's worth pointing out because you're right. Virginia does not fit that narrative. And we end up with Abigail Spanberger, a former 3-term congresswoman, an ex-CIA officer, winning out against Lieutenant Governor Winsome Earl Sears. And it is just a bit of history here, of course. This is the first time both major party nominees in Virginia were a woman, and that meant that you were going to undoubtedly get the first female governor of Virginia. So no matter which party won, you were going to get that, and we did, which makes Spanberger she will be the first female governor of Virginia. Now her race is maybe just in all honesty, she walks probably in terms of percentages. She's a little bit beyond what Ma'am Domney did, right? So she's going to end up with 57%, just a little over 57% of the vote.
Although to be fair, there's a 3-way race. We're ignoring Curtis Sliwa here at our peril,
that's true. I mean, he ends up with 7% of the vote.
Yeah.
So, assuming that would have gone to Ma'am Domney, that's an interesting question.
That's probably those are probably mostly Cuomo votes, in reality.
Well, I see, which again, if we read it that way, and I agree with you, that means that the Spanberger victory is even larger.
Is bigger. I'm sorry. Yeah. Sorry. No, I agree with that. I got lost in my head somewhere because I'm trying so hard.
No, I've been there.
It's so hard not to use my potty
I agree
mouth.
with you because so what you were bringing up was one potential response is to say, Democrats be Democrats, right? And that's what's going to happen. But I think Virginia is not as good of an indication of that. So continue.
Yeah, but and I think there is. It's worth having soul searching. I mean, you after an electoral loss, like you need to think about, what can we do differently and things. And again, 24, it's very hard. I mean, it's a bad economy and a messed up campaign. I mean, it's what was that, a 3-month campaign for Harris or something like that, and so I'm not sure that there's a lot of and you get all the consultants. It's like, well, you got to do this, you got to do this. It's like, well, you need to run a full campaign and not have expensive gas.
Well, and there was always going to be an uphill battle because it is the economy as a huge variable. And look, whether you liked Biden or you didn't like him, in his time in office, we had terrible economic numbers. Now, was that going to come around as a result of some of his policies or not? Is a question that we could debate about, but that's not
coming around, to be fair, but nobody perceived it as that.
Well, and that also another important kind of political science element. I talk to students about this all the time. Voters are not prospective voters. They are retrospective voters, as Fiorina once famously put it. And what that means is that people are not voting on what they think will happen in the future, because that's really complicated, right? I mean, just even predicting your own future is hard. What we're voting on is kind of a series of positive and negative tick marks as it relates to the people who are in office. And Biden was holding a lot of inflation. That was one of the biggest items. He was holding a bunch of inflation during his 4 years.
And that's, and you could contextualize it and whatnot. And, I mean, the rate had fallen to about normal by the end. But the problem with inflation is that doesn't feel good because everything's expensive.
Already higher. Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's not going up as fast anymore, but it's still up. I was just having a discussion with one of my colleagues today because both of us drink ridiculous amounts of pop. And, I used to be able to get 2 liters of my diet soda of choice for like $1.25 on sale, a lot of the time. And, they're like $2.89, now, and that hurts me more than gas, honestly.
I walk to work with gas. Who cares?
Who cares? Yeah, I don't drive anywhere, but I drink copious amounts of pops. So I guess, but to turn back to now, I mean, to this wave, I do think that I think part of it is to customize the message a little bit. I mean, to be around that theme of, because I think to some extent, I mean, all of these candidates that win are kind of speaking that same message about affordability and things like that. I mean, I think some of this too, Trump's not on the ballot, but Trump's on the ballot. I mean, that's, that's the standard midterm story. It's like, yeah, they're not on the ballot, but everybody that's mad at him, got to stop myself right there. It was almost 4. Everybody that's
we're gonna get to 4.
Get to 4. But everybody that is angry at the president is going to take it out on, the president's party is where that comes from. And so I do think that, I think this is a harbinger of generally good things for Democrats, going forward. But just, Trump has really not delivered economically. I mean, that was sort of his message. And I mean, to the extent that,
I would say he delivered what he promised, but the outcomes have not been, but the outcomes have not been what we're anticipating. I think voters were anticipating.
I mean, the only 2 things that are cheaper are gas and eggs, and everything else is still pretty expensive. And again, the rate's not bad, but the the prices have not come down, and there's those same frustrations. This last jobs report was pretty bad, to be honest. I don't think got
at least the extent that we have it.
Yeah, well, there's that. So even with whatever thumb he's put on the scale, I mean, what was it, 47,000 jobs, something like that? I mean, that's well below. You need 150 to 200 a month to kind of keep pace with growth. So I mean, he's really he promised a lot and hasn't delivered on those sorts of things. And so, he is shored up really well, with his base. They really like ICE and they like tariffs and whatnot. But his base isn't big enough to win. I think where Democrats have to be a little careful, I think, again, you're balancing those independents with your own base. But, to a large extent, I think a lot of those swing voters, they don't really care about ICE. They don't really care about Trump. Seem to be upset about the tearing down the East Wing of the White House, of all things. But man, if you can drive home, it's the economy, stupid, to quote James Carville from 33 years ago. Just drive that bus, because I don't think it's going to be. I'm not seeing anything on the policy front that's going to make this appreciably better a year from now. I'm.
BTW, FYI. Visit Nexplanon.com RN to learn about Nexplanon. It's an adjustral implant, 68 milligrams radio pain. Or ask your HCP IRL. Okay, TTYL.
Go ahead. I've been talking a lot. So.
No, it's all good. I mean, the only thing that you could even potentially do on the policy front is, well, if the tariffs came down, I think you would see some pretty immediate price reliefs.
Yes.
And that would be a positive go. And again, obviously, my free market bias is coming out here, but I think there's a lot of economic data that suggests that even if you think it's a good idea, it's like, Ken and I have had this conversation before. Ken and I both agree about what's going to be the outcome of tariffs, but the difference is what you're going to get in return. I don't think you get a lot in return for it. And tariff people are going to say, but you're going to get industry. And my answer is that is simply not been shown by anybody's data that that's what's going to come, what's going to happen.
It may well work in sort of targeted situations, but like there's no amount of target that like is no amount of tariff that's going to get you, your Old Navy T-shirts made in the U.S. again.
Exactly.
Like that's just not, the expectation that we can buy, $10 T-shirts or $5 T-shirts.
And it doesn't mean that we have to overlook, like as you're noting, like maybe we have countries that are doing things that we think are simply unethical with workers and others, and so maybe we have kind of those targeted items, but that's still fundamentally different than saying, look, we're going to have tariffs
across the board on everything. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, because I'm not necessarily anti-tariff in certain situations. I mean, there are retaliatory things where there is
for non-economic reasons, effectively, right? They are for moral or political
reasons, political reasons, or frankly, I mean, there are economic reasons sometimes. I mean, if somebody is, running at a loss to kill your steel industry or something like that, I mean, that's,
but of course, that's what you got things for like the WTO for, right? I mean,
you get the WTO, and you tariff steel. You don't tariff everything, so, right. But yeah, I think you're right. I mean, we would see, I think, some degree of relief. I mean, in some ways, the tariffs have not been, I think, as bad on prices as the worst expectations might have been. On the other hand, I think some of that jobs report is that because I think, companies are kind of eating some of the, they passed on some and ate some of it, and profits are going to be rough.
And let's be honest, I think they were eating some of it, not out of some kind of altruistic, but because of the nature of the Trump on again, off again tariff nature. It almost, if you don't want to go out and then come back. You'd rather wait for that to stick around for a minute and then say, okay, wait a second, we've been eating this for 8 months. We've been eating this for 9 months. Now maybe we start to increase that at a slower rate, because if you do this, that does not get blamed on Trump. That gets blamed on the industry.
And if prices are fluctuating, nobody's going to buy anything. I mean, this is why I don't shop at Kohl's. Like, they have a different sale every week, and I never feel like I'm getting the right deal because if I just wait another week. But I think the bouncing tariffs are going to be like that. Who's going to buy stuff? Anything apart from food? Like, who's going to buy anything if they don't know what the price is going to be a week from now or 2 weeks from now? So
yeah.
So anyway, go ahead.
But I agree. I think what we might need to do is, I think that starts to bump up against the shutdown. And I think it might be time to kind of bring that in as well. Yeah. That's what we're on the same.
Yeah.
So let us again, I bumped this to the number 2 spot, probably not because it has to be number 2, but because I was just tired of I was tired of it being number 1.
So I don't know, I know you were coming from class, but there's actually been a little movement this afternoon, maybe.
I saw maybe a little bit. Are you talking about on the moderates on having some of those bills go through
some individual bills? Yeah.
Yes.
So it's actually, I mean, yeah, the last thing I've wanted to talk about for most of this is the tariffs, because like absolutely nothing was happening. But today there's actually some motion. But go ahead.
Well, there is. Well, there's 3 motion-y things to chat about.
Yeah.
One, of course, is just the historic nature of what's going on, right? As of today, Friday, November 7th, we have had the 38th day of the shutdown, and that makes this the longest shutdown in history, right? And we would have hit that mark on Wednesday. So Wednesday the 5th, that when we reach 36 days, that's going to beat the previous record from 2018 to 2019 of 35 days. And we had been, we've talked about that. Then the other thing, and I'm curious about on this front, Ken, when he and I did the show last time, he made this prediction that the Democrats are in all the strength positions. Democrats are going to win if they just hold together, and they just got to let this shutdown drag all the way into December. And if we get close to January, that's the victory for Democrats at that location. And I'm curious about your take on that. But I want to give us kind of the 3 major newish stories. And I think you're right. One of them is we have this, I think was being called kind of the minibus bill.
Yep.
Or the minibus package, which is, look, give us some several year funding for agencies like Veterans Affairs and Agriculture in exchange for a standalone vote on ACA subsidy increases, is what I had been seeing as being the one tossed around. Then, meanwhile, at the same time, although he seemingly has backed away from it when it came to his most recent comments in Fox News, but on Wednesday, there has been again procedural talk about ending the filibuster, although there doesn't appear to be enough Republican support to do that. Although even
I don't
today,
think Chuck Grass is ever going to go for it, and
there's still enough
old guys that but yeah.
Yeah. And so, but that was there. As a matter of fact, he said to be quote, a tragic mistake not to do it. I noticed, like, so the New Yorker, New Republic, a couple of the liberal outlets were basically saying, hey, this is our chance. Democrats should partner. And I thought, that's not going to happen, friends. That's not going to happen. But I am curious
I like to be
on your
filibuster, but not like this. Yeah.
Well, well, and I think that's going to be the other issue is, I mean, again, I think if Democrats do it here, it would give them some goodwill in one way, but I don't know. So start with Ken's assertion, why don't you? Because he and I argued pretty deeply on that. Do you think Democrats are still in the winning? Do you think Democrats are in the winning seat the way that Ken is portraying that? And do you think that this will last as we get to January?
Yes and no, in that order. So,
Okay.
I think Democrats to an extent have the upper hand. I mean, if you look at the polling, more people are blaming it on Trump than are blaming it on Democrats. And that may be a little bit of the Tuesday night story, as well, is that, I mean, the shutdown and Trump, certainly mentioned that, in talking to Republicans, is that this is part of the problem too. I think from a public perception, they have a slight upper hand. I think the concern one is just one of leverage to some extent, which, I've never been clear that Democrats had a lot of leverage, although frankly, I kind of don't like these minibus ideas, because that really gives up any leverage that they had, at all. That said, I do think if this draws out, one thing here, I mean, people can be kind of upset about SNAP and whatnot. And I will just go on record as saying, I think a lot of what I'm seeing from Republicans about SNAP is just absolute crocodile tears. How dare you not fund this program that we think is fundamentally wrong, anyway. So, but I think, this airline stuff, and some of these other things, part of it is, it takes a while, even with stuff shut down, to hit people directly. So SNAP is just now hitting people sort of directly. This is it's just a couple days ago that, people were not getting their money. And, you get some stories about communities mobilizing and things, around feeding people. But I think, we're getting to then, if this goes into January, you're getting into impacting a lot more people in very concrete ways. So, somebody in higher ed, my first thought was, if this spills into January, what happens to people's financial aid for the spring semester? Now again, that's a smaller number of people than are on SNAP, I think, but it's going to be like death by 1,000 cuts. And I think, I don't know who it hurts necessarily, but I don't think anybody comes out looking good when it starts, impacting.
Here's some of the data from that, right? So if we want to kind of think about this, our most recent polls show that 48% of respondents agree that Democrats should continue to, quote, refuse to approve a budget unless it includes extending these tax credits, even if that means the government remains shutting down. 50% shows the alternative, the Democrats should approve a budget without tax credits, quote, in order to quickly end the shutdown, even if that means the cost of health insurance will increase for some people. And so, right now, I mean, it's closer, I think, than Republicans would like it to be. But as pure numbers go, more individuals want the shutdown to end than they seemingly want the subsidies when they're being polled. Now, I think Ken's position, though, is that as we are here in the subsidy season, that those numbers are going to start to push significantly. And what I'm hearing you say is that you think things like one of the other things that I thought we could talk about in more detail. Like, so for example, the FAA's drastic action, right? They are cutting 10% of flights today. That impacts 1,200 flights, and that's going to increase as we move forward through the weekend. And as that goes forward, I think one view is to say that as that goes on, people are going to increasingly blame Republicans for those difficulties. And I'm not some prognosticator, but it does. I mean, it would seem like if that was the position, why aren't we already seeing that polling here in November, since in fact we now do have these subsidies in people's, or excuse me, we have, this is when you're making these purchases. I mean, I've gotten my ACA medical things at the beginning of the month.
Mm-hmm.
I would expect, if Ken's thesis was right, then I should expect to see that occurring now. And if it's going to take until December, it seems unlikely that that's that split. I don't see the polling shifting in a major way, and Democrats don't have the polling numbers at the moment.
Well, I guess I'd throw out there that, so I'm furiously Googling as we're talking. So I don't know what we did before the internet slept, but the polling is muddy though. So it's NBC had a poll just reported out, looks like a day or two ago, 3 days ago. Trump, public blames Trump 52-42 for the shutdown over Democrats. So that's really a mixed message. Do we want Democrats to fight over the thing? It's a dead heat. Who do we blame? We blame Trump by 10. So I'm not sure what you do with that exactly. And this is one of those times where, as somebody who studies public opinion, it's often incoherent a little bit. I mean, this is, certainly one of those moments. So, but I mean, it could be that by the end, everybody just kind of throws up their hands. I mean, if this starts, kind of spiraling stuff, and I think to some extent, this ACA thing, as much as anything, I'm a little surprised actually with the numbers that you had, that there weren't a lot more don't knows. Maybe those were excluded. But I have a feeling this maybe those were excluded from those results, but this feels like the kind of thing that a lot of people have not spent a lot of time thinking about, to be honest. When you get down kind of into the more specifics of policy, knowledge drops off very quickly.
And
people, the Affordable Care Act, I mean, people still to this day don't really understand, a large swath of people don't understand how it works, so this is an important point. It's a critical point as far as making the policy work, but it is a hard thing to wrap your head around, I think, for a lot of the public that doesn't understand what this is, or that 5% of the public that thinks that the Affordable Care Act is something different than Obamacare, and whatnot. So
well, and back to media, right? The nomenclature of these things is so key to how, and as you talk about that, one of the ways that we started thinking about media different was in fact the fact that we had all of these polls where we saw that these tiny changes in nomenclature leads to these giant outcomes in how people respond, right? And so there's a really modern, contemporary, classic example of that. Is it Obamacare? Then it's terrible. Is it the Affordable Health Care Act? Then it's pretty good. Well, friends, I got news for you.
And this isn't just Obama. Jim Kuklinski. No. Jim Kuklinski had a piece in, it was like AJPS or something back in the early mid 2000s, looking at Bush's Social Security plan, and you could describe the plan, and if you just threw in Bush's plan, support for it dropped by a bunch. So people are. So I guess I don't place so much weight on maybe that poll that's so close there around the specific policy, just because I'm not sure that a lot of people really get what that, they know government shut down, they know they're mad, is sort of part of it. But I guess, back to strategy, I don't like the piecemeal approach, because I mean, ultimately, what the out party has here is, and this will maybe pivot us to the other point, what they have here, the minority party, what they have is the ability to stop anything from moving, unless you can get to 60 votes. And, so far they've held fast, but I think that takes the wind out of the sails. And when Obama had a shutdown, briefly, I had thought, like he's giving up too much right away in terms of not turning things off. If you're going to, it's basically he funded all the Republican priorities and didn't fund any Democratic priorities. And at that point, why would you negotiate as a Republican? And so I think, here, I think, extracting a concession of sort, frankly, getting a victory, getting something to sell so that you don't look like a bunch of wimps, that has some value too.
That's an excellent point, but here's my fundamental question. So whatever we think about the actual policy of it, it seems deeply unlikely to me that enough Republicans would defect and join Democrats to in fact pass the ACA subsidies. So even if tomorrow we have a vote,
are you talking about that as a standalone or as part of the? Yeah.
So
if Democrats give that up as a standalone vote, it loses. The end.
Right. So I think that is part of the potential weakness for Democrats, which is they have long suggested that you're not supposed to have requirements in clean funding bills for anything. And that has time and time again been their position when it comes to shutdowns until this time. And again, I'm actually sympathetic to the ACA extensions, but it makes them not just inconsistent, but it makes them blatantly, obviously inconsistent in ways that you can be run against later. And so when even if you get this vote, you lose. Like it doesn't appear to me that Democrats are going to win.
I guess this goes back to my sort of three audiences, from before. But I do think, they need to. One of the things I think that see kind of anecdotally and in a little bit of polling with the base, is, part of 24 is that they had some, there were some real people that, some real concerns. I think turnout a little bit on, to the left was something that certainly hurt them. And again, there's limits to this, because like I said, you're going to siphon some moderates off by moving, too far left. At the same time, there is a lot of dissatisfaction with Democratic leadership, from Democrats going into the midterms. And part of it, I share this, and I try to temper a little bit because they've been dealt a bad hand, but I also think Schumer and Jeffries are kind of yutzes. They're no Nancy Pelosi, that's for sure. And
we'll talk about that in a second, too.
Exactly. She would have her high heels on somebody's toes.
How close?
Toes. So, I'm going to hit 4 through 29 right at the end, I think. But anyway,
you got to save that for the supporters exclusive show.
Supporters
Justin.
exclusive.
You got to save that for the supporters.
Support us on Patreon so you can hear Justin say the F word repeatedly. Anyway, but
I feel like we can make money on that. I feel like there's a,
I feel like this is in my skill set. But
politics guys unfiltered.
Yeah.
After dark. After dark might be even better.
Politics guys after dark. Nobody needs to see that in a video format. But I do think, for Democrats, though, I think there is value. And I think it remains an open question because I think you're right, in terms of at least one population, there's a risk of taking blame. There's a risk of looking hypocritical, On the other hand, man, the base is dying for a win. And I'm not sure if you cave on this, the perception among a lot of the Democratic base is that you guys cave on everything and why should we support you, and Democratic approval is really, for kind of Democrats in Congress right now, the approval is quite low. And that's what happens when you lose your own supporters, and so I think that's something that they need to. So I think there's something for a win there. I think, do you want to talk about the filibuster for a minute?
I think we've kind of answered that question in a large part here, which is I don't think that's the path forward. I don't think there's enough Republican votes to make that happen. No. And the reason, again, Trump never backs down from things, and from Wednesday to Thursday, he had already effectively backed down in many ways from the. I think that's the indicator here. What I think might be more interesting to end the show on, Justin, would be, we have Nancy Pelosi's a retirement announcement, and we have Dick Cheney's death. And so maybe it's kind of a coda here. We talk about this. You already brought up Pelosi, right? Because
I was subtly leading you. Yeah.
Yeah. It was on the list. I appreciate it. But, yesterday, Nancy Pelosi, now 85, announced that she's not going to seek re-election in Congress in 2026. But she will serve out the remainder of her current 20th term, ending a congressional career that begins in 1987. I want to point out here, friends, I am a 42-year-old college professor. Nancy Pelosi would have served her first term when I was 4. To put that into perspective for everybody.
I was 10. Yeah, this age thing, I dropped some reference to 2008 election, and some student pointed out, I was 2 then, and I'm just like, you fail.
Well, many of us are. They weren't even that old. Oh. She released a 6-minute video, because who doesn't now, right? You got to have your videos.
Yeah, of course.
It's just the way that it is. That sounded like I'm taking a shot at her. It's more of a shot at like the whole, the productive video thing is more but anyway, we'll put that to the side. That's not a shot at Pelosi for that particularly.
General
She said, quote, "I will not be seeking re-election in Congress. With a grateful heart, I look forward to my final year of service as your proud representative. My message to the city that I love is this: San Francisco, you know your power. You have made history. We have made progress. We have always led the way," end quote. But I think part of her coda is she both had all of these firsts. She is the first female speaker. She achieved that in 2007. She remains the only female speaker ever, although she'll hold that post twice, non-consecutively. She's the chief architect in Congress, at least, for the Affordable Health Care Act. So despite the fact that it gets named Obamacare, in many ways, it's a lot of... It's the Pelosi care.
That would be 10 points less popular than the Affordable Care Act, just to be clear.
Probably. But I think she's also a great example of the weirdness that a lot of people, as a matter of fact, today in my classes, we were taking a look at some videos of old debates, and because we're doing some media studies here. And so I said, well, what do you notice? And the first thing many students said was, man, they're not all old people back then. Which is there's a fair critique to be
I've
there.
shown clips of the Nixon Kennedy, and it's like, not only is Kennedy young, but geez, there was a time that Nixon was young. Yeah.
Yes. That was one of the clips I was showing, which is
mind blowing that Richard Nixon was once a young man. But and
that's
Pelosi.
when he ran for. But she's 85. Donald Trump is it seems, and I'm curious about your take on this. You have the accomplishments of Nancy Pelosi, whether you see them as being good or bad, but you have her as being, I think, emblematic of the "I never leave office." And what do you think about that? Is that part of her legacy?
Probably. And I think, she could do it because she was really good at what she does. I think if you're looking at kind of consequential speakers of the House in the last 5-6 decades, it's her and Gingrich. She was really good at what she does. Whether you like her on policy or not, she was excellent at working the House in ways that, frankly, a lot of them, Republicans have had a lot of problems. I think the current Democratic leadership is not very good. She was a monster fundraiser. She was sort of a good listener. She was good at coalition building and kind of persuading people, et cetera. But yeah, I think it's hard for me to knock her when Chuck Grassley is my senator, for hanging around too long. But I do think that's a problem for Democrats, at this point. And I am not a term limits person. And I will say that, like, that's the political science answer generally too, is that, term limits are probably not a good idea, because I do think that, apart from kind of some of the findings there, I think there's value in having people with experience. And there's value in people knowing policy, and there's value in people knowing how the chamber works and whatnot. I do think 85 is too old, to be clear. And I think a lot of, I think this is a real problem with the Democrats have had, is that, it is, especially in a party where, often the base tends to be young. Can you look to, and Nancy Pelosi did a lot of things that I think young people would like. She was an early AIDS advocate, and such. And so, she's got a lot to stand for there. But at some point, if these people don't, does Nancy Pelosi speak to me, at 85 years old? No, and I can only imagine what a 20-year-old thinks about that. So I think you're onto something there. And she's not the only one. There's a whole cadre of just, heck, to stick with California. Dianne Feinstein, it was practically Weekend at Bernie's by the end of her term. God rest her soul. But
it was.
But she was barely cogent. She was.
And to be clear, it's not, because we're talking about
Nancy Pelosi. I will say Pelosi for 85 is
amazing.
Yeah, she's more coherent than I am.
I will never forget, for kind of a coda on that kind of conversation. I was working for the College Republicans. I was at Northern Kentucky University as an undergraduate.
Yep.
And I'll never forget way back when, Mitch McConnell was coming to do a bigger talk, but the college Republicans are the ones kind of putting it on. So we were close. We got to be with his handlers and kind of fun stuff like that. And he was really kind of struggling up there's 2 steps up to this little platform, and his aide was helping him. And I'll never forget, I won't name all the names, but one of his close advisors and aides, he kind of told us confidentially, he's like, yeah, just keep in mind, this is probably his last go round,
And how long ago was this?
That would have been, so again, I'm 42, so that would have been my junior year
his last go round 20 years ago. Yeah.
Yes.
No,
exactly.
because I mean, and he's finally retiring, but yeah, I mean, it's so
well, like Pelosi in that sense, but
yeah,
but it is an interesting question.
But I do think that it's a problem, and I feel like it's a worse problem for the Democrats in a lot of ways. I mean, there are so many.
Well,
you get them and you hold
Republicans. Well, whether you like it or hate it, I mean, one of the things that I've noticed is you have almost no Republican holdovers who are pre-Trump in the House, for example.
Yeah.
And so as a result, Republicans have, in fact, just empirically rotated in a way that Democrats have not done in the last 50 years.
Well, and to give one of my standard rants, I mean, some of this is districting. There are so few competitive districts that once you get a hold of a district, it's yours as long as you want it, to a large extent. A few, AOC notwithstanding, and I mean, you get outliers here and there, but for so many of these, and to be fair, I mean, Pelosi, it's not like you have to gerrymander San Francisco to get a Democrat, by any stretch.
What?
In much the same way that Iowa 4, like, you don't have to do anything weird with the borders to guarantee a Republican win out there. So it's not that for her necessarily, or not untoward, but at the same time, it's a safe seat. And I think that's some of the issue too, is that, once you get somebody in, I was a member of the College Democrats officer with Nikki Budzinski, who represents Central Illinois in the House now. And she got she came across as young, getting elected at 46, I think, she would have been when
and that would be comparatively
young, but it was basically, I mean, the same guy had held that seat forever, and he finally retired, and but that's kind of what a lot of Congress looks like, and I don't think in a broader sense is good. But I will say, just Pelosi in general, I like her, and honestly, I mean, I think she was pretty effective till the end, so I can't really fault
she was
her.
effective, and even from the other side of the aisle, I have to say that she was undoubtedly an important role model, an important trailblazer for women in Congress. And in some ways, like little things that you wouldn't know, that the fact to have locations so that women could have spaces for babies and other things in Congress, when that was a possibility, that came from Pelosi. And I think you get that from her. So again, even if you don't disagree with her policies, I do think you have to give her credit for having made it to that position, done it as a woman, and then tried to help some other women make that go. But I think probably on that note, give your last thought.
And while that's all important, I mean, she was also about as good at doing the job as anybody, I mean.
I was kind of saying that was a given, and so the next thing is to say that you don't.
So, but just to get that, anyway. But
we should finish with that. That's fair, right? Again, she got the AC. Whether you thought it was a good thing or bad thing, she's the one who passed the ACA.
Oh, I've always been convinced that Republicans were so mad at her as much as anything, just because she's real good at what she does.
Why wouldn't you be? I mean, I'm always the people who aren't effective, we don't get mad at them, we laugh at them, and we move on. And well, on that note, though, we're going to pause and put it into the weekend show. Now, Justin and I here in just a minute, we are going to continue into our 3rd episode on the ideological show. So we're taking a look at contemporary political ideologies. It's a lot of fun. We're going to be moving into conservatism this week. So we've covered ideologies as a concept. We talked about liberalism a couple weeks ago, and now we're going to get into conservatism. So I'm really excited about that one. Conservatism is a really unique and non-dogmatic, in some ways, it's the non-ideology, at least according to conservatives, right? Because you can't. But we'll get to those concepts.
It's just how things are, as they would tell you.
It's just the way it is. So if you want to join us for that, or for any of our weekend episode or our midweek episodes, you need to become a supporter of the Politics Guys, and it just takes a couple of minutes. We've got all different kinds of plans. All you have to do is head down to the show notes or head to politicsguys.com patreon.com/support. Do that, become a supporter, and you'll be able to get our show when it comes out here in just a few days on conservatism. So again, scroll down to the show notes, or in your browser, head to politicsguys.com/support, or head to patreon.com/politicsguys. Additionally, if you'd like to reach out to us, one of the most incredible ways to do that is, in fact, via email or Discord for our supporters. As a matter of fact, right now, it is possible, and we'll be doing this again in the future. You can listen to the show live if you're one of our Discord supporters. And this would be the first episode where that was the case. And we've had several people joining us in the background. And I've been responding to some of those texts as we were going along. So I'd like to see that to be higher, but of course I didn't give it a lot of warning. But be thoughtful about that. There's all different kinds of things you get at different levels of support. So if that is not a place you can financially be right now to support the Politics Guys, we get that. Just shoot us an email at mail@politicsguys.com and we can get you set up to have some access to some of the show. Also, would you please subscribe, rate, and review the show? AI is important, and those algorithms are based in AI, and that's one of those items. So help the metrics. If I'm to use administrator speak, the metrics have to be better.
Or to quote my kid, like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe. Mash the like and subscribe button below right now for more F-bombs from Justin. No, that could be our new go. But on that hilarious note, I want to say thank you so much to the executive producers of the Politics Guys, who are Wilmer Marino, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, Don Oglesby, Derek Schmidt, Dakota Heath, Jason Chrysler, Dave Dean, Jeremy Larson, Brian Matza, and Jody Miller. We'll be back with our midweek show shortly, and we'll be back with a new full episode next weekend. I hope you'll join us then.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,